The year is 1810. A wooden wagon sits on a dirt road in Buffalo, New York, located on the eastern shore of Lake Erie. Two laborers lift a wooden barrel of flour into the back of the wagon bed. The barrel, constructed by a cooper using white oak staves and secured with 6 hickory hoops, weighs exactly 196 pounds. Buffalo contains around 500 residents. The wagon driver sits on a pine board across the front of the wagon. He snaps a braided leather whip in the air, above 4 oxen. The oxen lean into their wooden yokes, pulling the iron-rimmed wheels through wet clay. The destination is New York City, located 400 miles to the southeast on the Atlantic coast. The journey will take 2 full weeks. The wagon travels at an average speed of 2 miles per hour. Moving 1 ton of freight overland from Buffalo to New York City costs $100. A barrel of flour sells for roughly $5 in the eastern markets. The wages for the driver and the cost of grain for the oxen consume the profit. The wagon moves east, away from the lake, following a trail cut through old-growth forests. Rain falls on the dirt track, turning the topsoil into thick mud. The wooden wagon wheels sink up to their hubs. The driver climbs down from the pine board and walks in the mud beside the animals. He pushes his shoulder against the oak wagon frame to keep it moving forward. The route passes through dense stands of oak, hickory, and maple trees. The tree canopy, 60 feet above the ground, blocks the sunlight, keeping the road surface damp. The dirt road transitions into a corduroy road through a low marsh area. Workers constructed this section by laying hundreds of felled pine trunks side by side across the mud. The iron wagon wheels strike each log with a loud crack. The wooden wagon bed shakes continuously. The flour barrel rattles against the sideboards. The driver grips the wagon to maintain his footing on the wet logs. The smell of decaying wet bark fills the damp air. Traveling across the corduroy logs slows the wagon to less than 1 mile per hour. At night, the driver unhitches the oxen and ties them to a maple tree. He sleeps under the wagon on a wool blanket. The air temperature drops to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The high cost of moving this flour stems from the physical geography of the North American continent. The Appalachian Mountains run parallel to the eastern coastline, stretching roughly 1,500 miles from present-day Maine down to Georgia. These mountains consist of continuous ridges of granite, sandstone, and dense forest. The peaks reach elevations of over 6,000 feet. East of these mountains, merchant ships bring manufactured goods from Europe into deep-water ports like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. West of the mountains, settlers grow wheat and harvest timber on flat, fertile land. The mountain range separates the agricultural products of the interior from the ocean ports on the coast. Pack mules and ox-drawn wagons must climb steep, rocky grades to cross the ridges. The animals require extra grain for energy on the inclines. Wagons break wooden axles on exposed granite boulders. Heavy rain washes away the dirt trails on the steep slopes. The physical exertion limits the amount of cargo a single wagon can carry. A typical wagon hauls only 1.5 tons of freight. New York State contains a specific geological anomaly within this mountain range. Near the center of the state, the Appalachian Ridge drops in elevation. The Mohawk River flows eastward through this lower elevation. The river cuts a valley straight through the mountains. The valley floor rests just 400 feet above sea level. This is the lowest pass through the Appalachian Mountains between the St. Lawrence River in Canada and the coastal plains of Georgia. The Mohawk River empties into the Hudson River near the town of Albany. The Hudson River runs straight south for 150 miles. The Hudson River is wide and deep, flowing directly into the Atlantic Ocean at New York Harbor. The water in the Hudson River rises and falls with the ocean tides. Wooden sailing sloops navigate the Hudson River from New York City up to Albany, using the winds coming off the Atlantic Ocean. The wagon carrying the flour barrel from Buffalo must reach Albany to transfer its cargo to a riverboat. The overland distance from Buffalo to Albany spans 280 miles. The dirt road follows the general path of the Mohawk River Valley, routing through the lower elevation. The wagon still must cross dozens of small streams and climb rolling hills. The driver pays tolls to private turnpike companies at wooden gates set across the road. The tolls add $20 to the final cost of the journey. The 4 oxen consume 50 pounds of forage each day. The driver buys hay from farmers along the route, handing over copper coins. The white flour inside the barrel compacts from the constant shaking of the wagon over the corduroy logs. Sometimes, the hickory barrel hoops break under the shifting pressure, spilling flour onto the muddy floorboards. The loss of a single barrel destroys the financial return for the merchant who shipped it. Moving bulk goods like timber, salt, and grain consumes all potential profits. Farmers leave their surplus crops in the fields. The financial strain of this overland transport system bankrupts merchants attempting to scale their businesses. A merchant pays farmers copper and silver coins for their wheat in western New York. The merchant pays a local miller to grind the wheat into flour. The merchant hires wagon drivers to haul the flour barrels over the corduroy roads and mud tracks to Albany. The merchant pays for storage in wooden warehouses along the river. By the time the flour reaches the buyers in New York City, the accumulated costs exceed the sale price. In 1807, a flour merchant named Jesse Hawley calculated these exact transportation costs. He shipped thousands of barrels of flour from Geneva, New York, to New York City. The wagon fees and spoiled cargo drained his bank accounts. His creditors demanded payment. He surrendered his remaining assets to the local court. The authorities arrested him for unpaid debts and locked him inside a stone cell in a debtor's prison in Canandaigua, New York. Jesse Hawley sits on a wooden bench inside a stone cell in Canandaigua, New York, during the autumn of 1807. The local sheriff locked Hawley inside the Ontario County Jail for defaulting on debts accumulated from his flour shipping business. The cell measures exactly 10 feet long and 12 feet wide. The walls consist of mortared limestone blocks stacked from the dirt floor to the wooden ceiling. An iron grate covers a single, narrow window opening facing the street. The air temperature inside the cell drops to 40 degrees Fahrenheit during the October nights. Hawley spends 20 months confined to this specific building. He purchases sheets of woven rag paper, an iron gall inkwell, and a goose quill pen from the jailer, using his remaining copper coins. Hawley writes a series of 14 essays detailing a proposed overland water route. He spreads a large piece of paper on a wooden table. He relies on memory and a few printed maps supplied by visiting family members. He dips the tip of the quill into the black ink and calculates distances across the New York landscape. He traces a path starting from the eastern edge of Lake Erie and extending 350 miles east to the Hudson River. Hawley proposes digging a trench 100 feet wide and 10 feet deep through the dirt and rock. He calculates the total cost of construction at $6 million. He outlines the specific waterways the canal would intersect, naming the Seneca River, Mud Creek, and the Tonawanda Creek. He determines the exact drop in elevation from Lake Erie to the Hudson River to be 565 feet. He signs the bottom of the first manuscript with the pen name Hercules. A local printer named John A. Stevens operates a wooden printing press down the dirt street from the jail. Stevens receives Hawley's first handwritten manuscript in October of 1807. The printer sets lead type into a metal frame, placing each metal letter into a wooden composing stick. He coats the raised metal letters with thick, oil-based ink, using leather pads attached to wooden handles. He lays a damp sheet of cotton rag paper over the type. He pushes the metal frame under the press and pulls a heavy wooden lever, pressing the paper against the inked letters. The first essay appears in the weekly edition of the Genesee Messenger newspaper on October 27, 1807. Stevens prints the remaining 13 essays over the next 6 months, concluding the series in April of 1808. Postal riders pack copies of the Genesee Messenger into leather saddlebags. They ride east along the dirt turnpikes toward Albany and New York City. The horses travel at a steady trot, covering about 30 miles per day. State legislators in Albany purchase copies of the newspaper and read the printed calculations. In 1808, the New York State Legislature allocates $600 to fund an initial land survey of the route Hawley described. The state hires Judge James Geddes to conduct the survey. Geddes uses a brass surveyor level mounted on a wooden tripod. He carries a 66-foot Gunter's chain made of iron links to measure the distances across the ground. Geddes walks the terrain between Oneida Lake and Lake Ontario. He drives wooden stakes into the ground to mark changes in elevation. Geddes submits a written report to the legislature confirming the physical landscape matches Hawley's written estimates. A state assemblyman named Joshua Foreman reads the Geddes report alongside the Hercules essays. Foreman packs his clothing into a leather trunk and boards a stagecoach in January of 1809. The stagecoach features a wooden carriage suspended on thick leather straps, pulled by a team of 4 horses. Foreman travels south from New York to Washington, D.C. The wooden wheels slide on the frozen mud ruts of the southbound roads. He secures a meeting at the White House with the President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. Foreman enters the executive office and unrolls a large paper map on a wooden desk. He points his finger to the proposed route drawn across New York State. He requests federal funding from the United States Treasury to hire laborers and purchase digging tools for the project. Jefferson stands over the desk and examines the lines drawn on the map. He reviews the estimated construction costs of $6 million. Jefferson responds verbally to Foreman. He states that building a 350-mile canal through a wilderness area is a little short of madness. Jefferson explains the federal government's current struggle to complete a much smaller canal extending only a few miles near the Potomac River. The Potomac project suffers from constant cave-ins and labor shortages, draining federal funds. The president officially denies the request for federal money. Foreman rolls up the paper map, ties it with a cotton string, and returns to New York State with the rolled document. The federal rejection shifts the entire financial burden of the project onto the state government. Copies of Hawley's printed essays continue circulating among merchants and politicians along the eastern seaboard. The mayor of New York City, DeWitt Clinton, receives a printed copy of the Hercules essays. Clinton sits in his municipal office in Lower Manhattan. The office features glass windows looking out toward the East River. Clinton observes the constant arrival of merchant ships from Europe docking at the wooden piers. Sailors unload crates of manufactured goods, textiles, and iron tools using thick hemp rope and wooden pulleys. Clinton reviews municipal tax records documenting the high overland freight costs, choking the city's trade volume with the Western territories. He reads Hawley's detailed geographic breakdown of the Mohawk River Valley Gap. Clinton begins gathering land surveyors, wealthy merchants, and state politicians to bring the written calculations into physical reality. DeWitt Clinton sits at a mahogany desk inside a brick building in Lower Manhattan during the autumn of 1815. He dips a steel-nibbed pen into a glass inkwell and writes a document known as the New York Memorial. The document outlines a plan to excavate a 363-mile trench from the Hudson River to Lake Erie. Clinton calculates the cost of moving 1 ton of freight over dirt roads at $100, compared to an estimated cost of $10 using a water route. He pays local printers to press thousands of copies of the memorial using black, oil-based ink on sheets of woven cotton paper. Young men carry stacks of these printed pamphlets into taverns, merchant exchanges, and town halls across New York City. Clinton attends public gatherings in these venues, standing on raised wooden platforms. The air in the taverns smells of burning pipe tobacco and whale oil lamps as Clinton points to the topographic maps. He reads the exact mileage and cost estimates aloud to crowds of shipbuilders, bankers, and merchants. Stephen Van Rensselaer, a landowner holding title to hundreds of thousands of acres of timber and farmland in upstate New York, signs his signature to Clinton's proposal. Gouverneur Morris, a former federal diplomat who physically wrote sections of the United States Constitution in 1787, also signs the document. The signatures of these wealthy landowners attract investments from private banks operating along Wall Street. Political opponents print attacks against the project in rival newspapers. Printers working in basement shops arrange lead type into iron frames, spelling out the phrases "Clinton's ditch" and "Clinton's folly." Delivery boys distribute the broadsheets to readers sitting at wooden tables in coffee houses. Politicians in Albany read the printed criticisms during legislative sessions in the state capitol. The opposing assemblymen cite the physical barriers of the proposed route, including the dense old-growth forests, the Montezuma swamps, and the solid limestone ridge of the Niagara Escarpment. They note the elevation change of 565 feet required to reach Lake Erie from the Hudson River. The State Assembly debates the proposed construction budget of $7 million. State tax collectors gather revenue from multiple new sources to supply the state treasury. The legislature enacts a tax of 12.5 cents on every bushel of salt manufactured at the Onondaga Salt Springs. They impose a $1 tax on every steamboat passenger traveling on the Hudson River. They collect a duty on all goods sold at public auction within the state. The $7 million estimate equals the entire operating budget of the New York state government for multiple years. Clinton rides a stagecoach from New York City to Albany, traveling for 3 days over rutted dirt roads. He walks into the state capitol building wearing a dark wool coat. He meets with undecided legislators in the narrow hallways, handing them updated topographic surveys and itemized cost breakdowns. Clinton sends political allies down to Washington, D.C. to request financial assistance from the federal government. The United States Congress reviews the request and votes to withhold federal money from the New York project. President James Madison signs a veto on a separate internal improvements bill in March of 1817, blocking federal funds for state infrastructure. The state of New York assumes the total financial burden of the 363-mile excavation. On April 15, 1817, the New York State Legislature holds a final vote on the Canal Bill. The assemblymen sit in wooden chairs inside the legislative chamber in Albany. They cast their votes orally, passing the Canal Bill by a margin of 64 to 36. The legislation authorizes the creation of a dedicated canal fund. The state government issues printed paper bonds to raise the immediate capital needed for construction. Bankers in New York and investors in London purchase these state bonds, handing over gold and silver coins to state agents. Armed guards transport the metal currency in iron-bound wooden strongboxes to secure vaults in Albany. Clinton wins the gubernatorial election and takes the oath of office as governor of New York on July 1, 1817. The Canal Commission, a board of 5 appointed men, establishes a physical headquarters to manage the construction. They rent office space in towns located along the proposed route, including Rome and Utica. The commissioners distribute state funds to purchase iron axes, wooden shovels, and hemp ropes. The state posts printed broadsides on tavern walls and wooden fences, offering excavation contracts to local farmers. The contracts specify the exact dimensions required for the trench. The workers must dig a channel 40 feet wide at the surface, 28 feet wide at the floor, and exactly 4 feet deep. They must clear a 10-foot wide towpath along one side for the draft animals. The design requires the construction of 83 stone locks to lift boats up the 565-foot elevation rise. Each lock measures 90 feet long and 15 feet wide. The locks require watertight wooden doors constructed from heavy white oak planks. Workers must assemble iron hinges to hold the doors against the mortared stone walls. The system requires specific hydraulic mechanisms, including iron paddle valves, to control the flow of millions of gallons of water in and out of the chambers. The Canal Commission requires men capable of calculating the water pressure against the walls and determining the exact angles of the lock chambers. They need supervisors to calculate the cubic yards of earth removed by each contractor. At this time, American universities offer instruction exclusively in law, medicine, and theology. The Canal Commission seeks experienced builders among a population composed entirely of farmers, tradesmen, and merchants. The commissioners issue surveying contracts to local county judges, self-taught mathematicians, and land surveyors who map property boundaries using brass compasses and iron measuring chains. In the year 1817, American colleges provide instruction in law, medicine, theology, and classical languages. Men seeking to build bridges or roads learn their trade through apprenticeships with carpenters and stonemasons. The French government operates the École Polytechnique in Paris, an academy teaching advanced calculus, civil architecture, and fluid dynamics. Great Britain relies on a network of established canal builders constructing hundreds of miles of commercial waterways using formalized engineering principles. The New York Canal Commission recruits men from local property boundary disputes and local courts to design their 363-mile waterway. They hire Benjamin Wright, a 56-year-old county judge living in the town of Rome, New York. Benjamin Wright works as a land surveyor, measuring property lines for settlers moving into the Mohawk Valley. He walks through the dense forests carrying a brass compass and a 66-foot Gunter's chain. The chain consists of exactly 100 forged iron links, connected by circular iron rings. Surveyors drag the heavy iron chain across the forest floor, pulling it tight between 2 points to measure distance across the ground. Back in the year 1791, an English engineer named William Weston traveled across the Atlantic Ocean to supervise a small locking project near the Wood Creek Portage in New York. Weston brought a custom-built, Y-shaped optical level fitted with a spirit tube and a magnifying telescope. Wright worked alongside Weston, observing the English engineer calculate water flow and elevation drops. Wright writes down the mathematical formulas used by Weston in leather-bound notebooks. He copies the methods for measuring the pressure of standing water against a stone wall. The Canal Commission also hires James Geddes, a 44-year-old magistrate and surveyor from Onondaga County. Geddes operates a salt boiling facility near the town of Syracuse, extracting salt by boiling natural brine in large iron kettles over open wood fires. Geddes maps property lines using a standard surveyor's compass mounted on a wooden staff. The Canal Commission tasks Geddes with finding a route connecting the Seneca River to Lake Erie. Geddes walks the Western Territory during the winter months. The broadleaf trees drop their foliage, providing a clear line of sight through the forest canopy. Geddes stands in snowdrifts, peering through the brass sights of his compass to measure the angle of the terrain. He wades into the Montezuma Marsh, stepping into 3 feet of freezing water to measure the depth of the mud below the surface. He draws topographical maps on large sheets of paper, detailing the location of limestone ridges, changes in elevation, and the paths of intersecting rivers. The Commission divides the proposed 363-mile route into 3 distinct sections. They assign Benjamin Wright to the middle section, spanning 90 miles of relatively flat terrain between Utica and the Seneca River. They appoint James Geddes to the western section, extending from the Seneca River all the way to Lake Erie. They assign Charles Brodhead, another local land surveyor, to the eastern section, following the Mohawk River down to the Hudson River. Brodhead surveys the steep drop in elevation near the Cohoes Falls, a geographic feature where the river water plunges 70 feet over a solid shale rock face. Each chief surveyor hires assistants to clear brush, drive wooden stakes into the soil, and hold the wooden leveling rods required for elevation measurements. The surveying teams establish a continuous baseline across the state of New York. An axeman chops down oak, hickory, and maple trees to create a straight, clear path through the wilderness. The surveyor plants a wooden tripod into the dirt and mounts a brass leveling instrument on the flat top. The brass leveling instrument features a sealed glass tube filled with alcohol and a single air bubble. The surveyor turns small brass screws on the base of the instrument until the air bubble rests exactly in the center of the glass tube. This adjustment ensures the telescope sights a perfectly horizontal line. An assistant stands 100 feet away, holding a wooden rod marked with painted increments of feet and inches. The surveyor looks through the glass lens of the level, aligning the internal crosshairs with the painted markings on the rod. He writes the elevation measurement into a paper notebook using a lead pencil. The team moves the tripod and the rod, repeating this process thousands of times to map the elevation changes of the entire 363-mile route. They pound wooden stakes into the ground at regular intervals of exactly 66 feet, marking the exact center line of the future trench. The wooden stakes consist of split oak branches sharpened to a point with an iron axe. The surveyors drive them into the earth using wooden mallets, striking the flat tops until the wood splinters. The 3 chief surveyors recruit younger men with aptitudes for mathematics to assist with the complex calculations. They hire Canvas White, a 27-year-old veteran of the War of 1812, and Nathan Roberts, a local schoolteacher who instructs students in algebra and geometry. The team calculates the volume of water required to fill a canal 40 feet wide and 4 feet deep. The surveyors determine the exact slope required to keep the water flowing at a manageable speed. The water must move fast enough to avoid stagnation, while remaining slow enough to stop the current from eroding the earthen banks. They draft cross-section diagrams showing the slant of the canal walls. They angle the side walls at exactly 45 degrees, a specific geometric slope calculated to stop the wet dirt from collapsing inward under its own weight. The men work in wooden cabins, heated by stone hearths, drawing blueprints with drafting compasses and straight edges on large wooden tables. They calculate the dimensions of the stone locks required to lift boats over the hills, planning chambers 90 feet long and 15 feet wide. By the summer of 1817, Benjamin Wright and his team complete the physical staking of the middle section. A line of wooden pegs stretches for 90 miles across the flat landscape near the town of Rome, New York. The middle section features a subsoil composition of gravel and loose loam, requiring less physical force to break apart than the rocky soil found further west. The Canal Commission prints paper notices and posts them in local taverns, offering cash payments to contractors willing to excavate specific segments of the marked route. Local farmers read the notices and sign paper contracts to dig sections ranging from a quarter mile to a full mile in length. The farmers return to their land, load their wooden carts with iron-tipped shovels, and walk toward the line of wooden stakes driven into the damp soil. On the morning of July 4, 1817, a group of local citizens, land surveyors, and state officials gather in a grassy field just outside the village of Rome, New York. The sun rises over the Mohawk Valley, warming the air to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Canal Commissioner Samuel Young steps forward, holding an iron spade attached to a smooth hickory handle. Young pushes the flat iron blade into the damp topsoil using the heel of his leather boot. He lifts a single shovelful of brown dirt and tosses it onto the grass. A local judge named John Richardson takes the spade next, driving the iron into the earth to remove a second scoop of dirt. The assembled crowd watches the men break the ground and begin the physical excavation of the 363-mile trench. The Canal Commission selected this specific location near Rome for strategic topographic reasons. Benjamin Wright and his surveying teams designated this area as the middle section. The middle section stretches for 90 miles from the town of Utica westward to the Seneca River. The land across these 90 miles features flat terrain with minimal elevation changes. The soil composition consists of loose loam, sand, and small gravel. The state planners direct the workers to dig into this yielding dirt to establish their construction methods. The completed segments of this flat 90-mile stretch provide physical proof of the project's viability to the state legislature. The state manages the massive excavation by breaking the 90-mile route into small, distinct segments. The canal commissioners advertise printed paper contracts for sections of the trench, measuring exactly 1/4 of a mile in length. Local farmers, grist mill operators, and merchants sign the state contracts using iron gall ink and quill pens. A contractor agrees to excavate his designated quarter-mile segment according to the geometric specifications drawn by the engineers. The contractor returns to his local community and hires his neighbors, farmhands, and transient laborers. The contractor pays the men daily wages ranging from 50 cents to $1 silver. The workers provide their own physical labor and bring standard agricultural tools from their wooden barns. The men walk to the work sites carrying iron-tipped shovels, heavy iron pickaxes, and woven willow baskets. The paper contracts require the men to dig a channel exactly 40 feet wide at the surface level. The dirt walls of the canal must slant inward at a precise 45-degree angle. The bottom floor of the trench must measure exactly 28 feet across. The depth must reach 4 feet from the top water line to the flat dirt floor. The workers also construct a 10-foot wide towpath along one side of the channel. They build this towpath by leveling the dirt to provide a flat, continuous walking surface for the draft animals. The physical excavation relies entirely on human muscle and animal traction. A worker swings a heavy iron pickaxe, bringing the sharp metal point down into the packed clay. The iron breaks the hard soil into loose clods. A second worker steps forward with a wooden shovel fitted with a flat iron cutting edge. He pushes the shovel under the loose dirt, lifting roughly 10 pounds of soil with each scoop. He throws the dirt into a wooden wheelbarrow resting on the ground. A third worker grips the two wooden handles of the wheelbarrow and pushes the single iron-rimmed wooden wheel up a slanted pine board. The worker dumps the dirt onto the outer edges of the trench. This excavated soil forms the raised earthen banks of the canal. The farmers bring their draft animals to the work sites to move larger quantities of earth. Teams of oxen, wearing carved wooden yokes, walk along the edge of the trench. The oxen pull flat-bottomed wooden slip scrapers through the loose dirt. The slip scraper consists of a wide wooden scoop, reinforced with iron bands. A man guides two wooden handles at the rear of the scraper as the oxen drag it forward. The iron cutting edge bites into the soil, filling the scoop with loose earth. The oxen drag the loaded scraper up the slanted bank. The operator lifts the wooden handles, tipping the dirt out onto the ground. The use of animal traction increases the volume of earth moved per hour. The men work 12-hour shifts, starting at sunrise and finishing at sunset. The summer temperatures in the Mohawk Valley rise above 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Sweat soaks the men's linen shirts and homespun wool trousers. They drink water from wooden buckets dipped into nearby creeks. At midday, the men sit on the freshly dug dirt banks to eat their rations. They consume salted pork preserved in wooden barrels, boiled potatoes, and thick slices of wheat bread. The high-calorie diet fuels the continuous manual labor required to swing the iron picks and push the heavy wheelbarrows. The digging pace moves slowly across the landscape. A crew of 3 men excavates approximately 15 cubic yards of earth during a single 12-hour shift. The project supervisors measure the forward progress in single yards. The constant friction of the wooden tool handles produces thick calluses and raw blisters on the palms of the workers' hands. The men encounter buried granite fieldstones hidden beneath the topsoil. An iron shovel strikes a hidden stone with a loud metallic scrape. The workers wedge a 6-foot oak lever under the edge of the granite boulder. 3 men push down on the wooden lever to pry the stone out of the dirt. They roll the rock up the slanted bank and stack it aside. Heavy summer rainstorms halt the excavation. Rainwater fills the shallow trench, turning the loose dirt into a thick, heavy mud. The iron wheels of the wheelbarrows sink deep into the wet clay. The mud sticks to the iron shovel blades, doubling the weight of each scoop. The workers wait for the sun to dry the soil before resuming the digging. The line of freshly dug earth creeps westward from Rome, yard by yard, following the wooden stakes driven into the ground by the surveyors. The men excavate the loose soil and gravel with their shovels for several miles. The flat, open fields eventually terminate at the edge of an old-growth forest. The surveyors' wooden stakes lead directly into thousands of acres of dense woodland. Oak, hickory, white pine, and elm trees stand squarely in the path of the 40-foot wide channel. The tree trunks measure up to 4 feet in diameter, covered in thick, grooved bark. Their branches form a continuous canopy 60 feet above the ground. The root systems spread wide and deep into the earth, interlocking beneath the topsoil. The men carry their iron axes and heavy ropes to the edge of the timberline. The workers walk into the shade of the old-growth forest, standing in the path of the canal route during the summer of 1817. The tree canopy blocks the sunlight, keeping the air temperature at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The planned route requires clearing a corridor 60 feet wide to accommodate the 40-foot channel and the 10-foot dirt towpath. A man grips the 30-inch hickory handle of a forged iron axe. He swings the axe, striking the trunk of a white oak tree measuring 3 feet in diameter. The iron blade cuts a wedge-shaped notch into the thick bark and the outer sapwood. White wood chips fall onto the damp leaves covering the ground. The physical impact sends sharp vibrations down the wooden handle, directly into the worker's calloused hands. 2 men stand on opposite sides of a 4-foot-thick hickory tree. They pull a 6-foot steel crosscut saw back and forth across the trunk. The steel teeth sever the wood fibers, producing a pile of damp sawdust on the forest floor. The tree falls to the ground, snapping smaller branches and exposing the sky. The men spend 4 hours chopping a single large oak tree down to the ground. The fallen trunk weighs over 3 tons. Severing the tree trunk leaves a massive wooden stump anchored into the earth. The root system of a mature oak spreads outward for 40 feet in all directions beneath the topsoil. The roots penetrate 3 feet deep into the dense, packed clay left behind by retreating glaciers thousands of years ago. The workers dig a circular trench around the base of the stump using iron shovels. The iron blades strike the thick wooden taproots. The men switch to heavy iron pickaxes. They swing the picks downward into the dirt to shatter the roots. The thick roots absorb the physical blows. The men spend 3 full days digging around a single oak stump to detach it from the surrounding clay. Sweat drips from their faces into the dirt. They pry the severed stump out of the hole using 10-foot wooden levers cut from pine saplings. The manual extraction of the roots halts the forward progress of the excavation entirely. Thousands of oak, hickory, and maple trees stand in the marked path, stretching westward. The Canal Commission requires a mechanical method to clear the forest wall. Canal engineers and local mechanics adapt a European logging mechanism to accelerate the tree clearing. They construct a machine using an endless screw, a mechanical device transferring rotational motion into linear pulling force. Mechanics cast heavy iron gears and forge thick iron chains at local blacksmith forges in the Mohawk Valley. They mount a threaded wrought iron cylinder horizontally inside a frame built from heavy oak beams. A wooden wheel, measuring 10 feet in diameter, connects to one end of the threaded iron cylinder. The wooden frame sits firmly on the dirt floor of the forest, anchored to a nearby tree trunk with thick hemp ropes. The mechanics attach a braided iron cable to the threaded cylinder. The machine uses the physical principle of mechanical advantage to multiply the force applied to the large wooden wheel. A worker scales 60 feet up the trunk of a white pine tree designated for removal. He carries the heavy iron cable draped over his shoulder. The worker loops the cable securely around the upper trunk of the tree, directly below the highest branches. He fastens the loop with a forged iron shackle. The high placement of the cable turns the entire 60-foot tree trunk into a massive wooden lever. The opposite end of the cable feeds directly into the endless screw mechanism resting on the ground. A worker attaches a wooden crossbar to the large 10-foot wheel on the machine. He hitches a team of 2 draft horses to the ends of the wooden crossbar using heavy leather harnesses. The horses stand on the damp soil, waiting for the command to move. The air smells of crushed pine needles, turned dirt, and horse sweat. The worker cracks a braided leather whip in the air, signaling the horses to walk forward in a tight circle around the machine. The horses push against their leather collars, turning the wooden crossbar. The crossbar rotates the large 10-foot wheel. The wheel turns the threaded iron cylinder. The threaded cylinder slowly winds the iron cable, pulling the metal line tight. The cable snaps taut between the ground machine and the treetop. The metal links rub against each other, producing a loud grinding sound. The endless screw mechanism multiplies the pulling force of the two horses into thousands of pounds of lateral pressure against the upper tree trunk. The 60-foot white pine tree begins to lean toward the machine. The tremendous leverage transfers the pulling force directly down to the root system buried in the earth. The soil at the base of the tree bulges upward, cracking the surface of the forest floor. The thick wooden taproots snap with loud cracks echoing through the forest clearing. The machine pulls the entire tree, roots and all, completely out of the ground in a matter of minutes. The tree crashes onto the forest floor, pulling a root ball heavily packed with clay and rocks into the air. The extracted root ball leaves a crater in the ground, measuring 10 feet across and 4 feet deep. Men step forward with iron axes to chop the branches off the fallen trunk. Workers pile the smaller branches into large heaps and ignite them, burning the wood to clear the space. Teams of oxen wearing carved wooden yokes drag the intact root balls and heavy logs out of the designated canal path. They stack the logs in long piles parallel to the canal route, saving the wood to build future lock gates and worker cabins. Using the endless screw tree feller, a small team of men and horses removes up to 40 mature trees in a single 12-hour shift. The operators move the iron and wood machine from tree to tree, clearing the 60-foot wide path through the forest at a rapid pace. The machine leaves behind an open corridor of churned dirt, ready for the wheelbarrows and shovels of the excavation crews. The workers look back at the sections of forest cleared during the first months of manual labor. The men who chopped down trees with axes earlier in the summer left thousands of bare stumps embedded in the dirt. These remaining stumps sit directly inside the path of the planned 40-foot channel. The tree felling machine requires the tall trunk of the tree to act as a lever. The flat stumps left behind by the axemen offer no leverage for the high iron cable. The Canal Commission tasks their mechanics to build a completely different machine to extract the isolated root systems blocking the route. The mechanics working along the canal route construct a massive wooden machine to extract the isolated root systems. In 1817, they build an axle from a solid oak log measuring exactly 30 feet in length and 20 inches in diameter. They attach a large wooden wheel to each end of this 30-foot axle. Each outer wheel measures 16 feet in diameter and features wide wooden rims measuring 1 foot across, designed to spread the heavy weight and roll over soft, muddy ground. They mount a third, slightly smaller wheel, precisely in the center of the 30-foot axle. This central wheel measures 14 feet in diameter. The mechanics wrap a thick forged iron chain around the center of the massive oak axle. They attach the free end of this iron chain directly to the exposed stump using heavy iron hooks. They wrap a thick hemp rope around the grooved rim of the 14-foot central wheel. A worker hitches a team of oxen to the end of this hemp rope using leather harnesses. The machine stands directly over the wooden stump, straddling the remaining roots. The worker commands the oxen to walk straight forward across the dirt. The oxen pull the hemp rope, which turns the 14-foot central wheel. The central wheel turns the massive 30-foot oak axle. The rotating axle winds the thick iron chain around its wooden circumference. The difference in size between the 14-foot central wheel and the 20-inch axle creates a massive mechanical advantage. The pulling force of the oxen multiplies by a factor of 16. The iron chain pulls upward on the stump with thousands of pounds of vertical force. The soil cracks and heaves as the thick taproots break beneath the surface. The iron chain links grind against the wood. The machine lifts the entire stump and its attached root ball completely out of the ground, suspending it in the air beneath the heavy axle. The worker stops the oxen. The locked wheels hold the heavy stump suspended off the ground. The worker commands the oxen to pull the entire wooden machine, with the dirt-covered stump hanging from the axle, away from the canal path. They roll the machine to the edge of the forest and release the iron hooks, dropping the root ball onto a pile of discarded wood. Using this specific machine, a team of 7 men and 2 oxen removes between 30 and 40 heavy stumps in a single 12-hour shift. The clearing of the stumps exposes the bare topsoil. The excavation crews adapt standard agricultural tools to cut through the remaining network of small roots embedded in the dirt. Blacksmiths heat wrought iron bars in coal forges reaching 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. They hammer the red-hot iron on steel anvils to form a specialized canal plow. They weld a horizontal iron cutting bar to the standard plowshare. A team of oxen drags this modified plow through the dirt path. The horizontal iron bar slices through roots up to 2 inches thick, severing the wood fibers underground. The severed roots allow the shovels to penetrate the soil without catching on the hidden wooden lines. The workers modify the traditional slip scraper to haul the loose dirt out of the trench. The mechanics reinforce the wide wooden scoop with additional iron straps to handle the heavy wet clay found in the western sections. A worker holds the 2 wooden handles at the rear of the scraper as a horse pulls it through the loose soil. The iron cutting edge scoops up the dirt, filling the wooden bed with heavy earth. The horse drags the filled scraper up the angled canal bank, depositing the load on the edge to form the towpath. A local mechanic named Jeremiah Brainard redesigns the common wheelbarrow to improve the efficiency of the manual excavation. Traditional wheelbarrows feature a square wooden box attached to a wooden frame. The wet clay of the Mohawk Valley sticks into the 90-degree corners of the square box, forcing workers to stop and scrape out the mud with their iron shovels. Brainard builds a new wheelbarrow, utilizing curved wooden boards to create a rounded, bowl-shaped bed. He mounts this rounded bed onto a frame with a single iron wheel. A worker pushes Brainard's wheelbarrow to the edge of the canal bank and tips the wooden handles upward. The wet clay slides freely out of the rounded bed, leaving bare wood behind. The worker immediately returns to the bottom of the trench to gather another load of dirt. The Canal Commission purchases hundreds of Brainard's rounded wheelbarrows for the excavation crews. The continuous cycle of slicing roots with the horizontal plow, ragging dirt with the reinforced scraper, and hauling clay in the rounded wheelbarrows advances the channel westward through the cleared forest. The excavation of the dirt channel creates a continuous waterway across the flat sections of the route. The canal must cross over existing rivers and climb steep elevation changes to connect the Hudson River to Lake Erie. The canal engineers design a series of 83 stone locks to lift boats over the hills and multiple stone aqueducts to carry the water over the rivers. They hire stonemasons to cut large blocks of grey limestone from local quarries using iron chisels and steel hammers. The masons stack these heavy stone blocks to form vertical lock walls measuring 15 feet high and 90 feet long. The water flowing through these stone structures exerts thousands of pounds of hydrostatic pressure against the mortared joints. The masons construct these walls using ordinary lime mortar, created by burning limestone in a kiln and mixing the resulting powder with water and sand. Ordinary lime mortar dissolves completely when submerged under running water. The flowing canal water washes the sand and lime out of the joints, causing the heavy stone blocks to collapse. The engineers require a specific chemical compound capable of curing and hardening underwater to bind the stone blocks together. The canal engineers designate specific locations for the 83 stone locks required to lift the wooden boats, a total of 565 feet between the Hudson River and Lake Erie. The engineers group 27 of these locks within a steep 15-mile stretch near the Cohoes Falls. Local landowners open limestone quarries near the construction sites to supply the heavy building materials. Men strike steel hand drills with heavy iron sledgehammers to bore deep holes into the solid bedrock. They pour coarse black powder into the drilled holes, insert cotton fuses, and ignite them to blast the limestone apart. Stonemasons cut the resulting boulders into precise rectangular blocks using iron chisels and heavy steel mallets. They transport these stone blocks, weighing up to 2 tons each, on wooden wagons pulled by teams of oxen. The masons stack the heavy stones using wooden cranes and hemp ropes to form vertical walls measuring 15 feet high, enclosing a chamber exactly 90 feet long and 15 feet wide. A single lock chamber holds up to 100,000 gallons of water. The standing water inside the locked chamber exerts thousands of pounds of outward hydrostatic pressure against the mortared stone walls. The stonemasons mix standard lime mortar to bind the heavy limestone blocks together. Workers build circular stone kilns measuring 10 feet in diameter and load them with layers of chopped oak wood and crushed limestone. They ignite the wood, raising the internal kiln temperature to 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit. The workers maintain the fire for 3 continuous days and nights. The intense heat alters the chemical structure of the limestone, releasing carbon dioxide gas and producing a dry, white powder called quicklime. Workers shovel this caustic quicklime into wide wooden troughs and pour in fresh water from wooden buckets. The resulting chemical reaction generates visible steam and intense heat, boiling the water and producing slaked lime. The masons mix the wet slaked lime with coarse river sand, using flat iron hose to create a thick, gritty paste. They spread this paste onto the top surfaces of the stone blocks using flat iron trowels, pressing the next block down to squeeze the mortar into the horizontal joints. Standard lime mortar hardens through a chemical process called carbonation, requiring direct, sustained exposure to the open air to absorb carbon dioxide gas. The canal water completely submerges the lower 10 feet of the lock walls, blocking the necessary air supply. The lime mortar remains soft and water-soluble while submerged below the waterline. The flowing water of the canal penetrates the narrow joints between the heavy stone blocks. The physical current washes the slaked lime and river sand out from between the stones. The white lime powder drifts downstream, leaving empty gaps between the heavy blocks. The heavy limestone blocks shift outward under the hydrostatic pressure of the standing water, compromising the structural integrity of the entire lock. European engineers utilize a specific hydraulic cement capable of curing into a solid mass while entirely submerged underwater. British manufacturers produce a material known as Parker's cement. They create Parker's cement by burning specific septaria nodules, a type of clay-bearing limestone found along the muddy English coastlines. The British workers grind the burnt nodules into a fine brown powder and pack the powder into heavy wooden casks. Merchant sailing ships load these heavy wooden casks into their lower cargo holds and transport them across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. New York merchants purchase the imported cement at the docks and add massive markups to the retail price. The overseas shipping costs, heavy weight, and import duties make the British hydraulic cement prohibitively expensive for the canal project. Purchasing enough imported cement to build the 83 stone locks and the 18 stone aqueducts exceeds the $7 million budget allocated by the New York State Legislature. The Canal Commission issues written instructions to the local stonemasons regarding the severe mortar shortage. The commissioners order the workers to construct the inner core of the heavy stone walls using the cheap, water-soluble lime mortar. They instruct the masons to leave a narrow gap measuring 1 inch deep at the outer edges of the stone joints facing the water channel. The commissioners plan to purchase a small, strictly limited quantity of the expensive British cement. The masons apply this imported hydraulic cement only to the outermost layer of the stone joints, creating a thin waterproof seal over the soluble core. The engineers calculate the high physical risk of this specific method. The thin outer layer of imported cement cracks under the expansion and contraction caused by changing seasonal water temperatures. The flowing water penetrates the cracks, dissolves the interior lime mortar, and forces the state to continually rebuild the collapsed lock walls every few years. The demand for a local waterproof cement creates a severe physical and economic barrier to completing the entire waterway. The wooden cargo boats rely entirely on strong, permanent stone locks to climb the elevation changes of the New York landscape. The continuous reconstruction of crumbling stone walls drains the state treasury and halts the westward progress of the channel. The canal commissioners require detailed physical knowledge of how the British engineers construct their permanent canal locks and formulate their hydraulic mortar. They select Canvas White, a 27-year-old assistant engineer, to cross the Atlantic Ocean to study the British methods. White served in the War of 1812 and sustained a physical bullet wound at Fort Erie. The canal commissioners purchase a paper ticket for White to board a merchant sailing vessel departing from New York Harbor, sending him to physically walk the towpaths of the British canal system and record their engineering techniques. Canvas White served as a lieutenant in the United States Army during the War of 1812. He sustained a severe gunshot wound to his body during a military sortie at Fort Erie in September of 1814. The lead musket ball damaged his internal tissue, requiring a long physical recovery. White leaves the military and joins Benjamin Wright's land surveying team as an assistant in 1816. White stands in front of Governor DeWitt Clinton and Chief Engineer Benjamin Wright in the autumn of 1817. He requests permission to travel across the Atlantic Ocean to inspect the established British canal network. Clinton and Wright approve the journey to gather technical data for the New York project. White purchases a passenger ticket on a merchant vessel using his own personal funds. He boards a 3-masted wooden packet ship in New York Harbor. The ship uses heavy canvas square sails to catch the prevailing winds, crossing the Atlantic Ocean at an average speed of 5 knots. White arrives at the coastal port of Liverpool, England, in the late autumn of 1817. Great Britain possesses a vast network of artificial waterways constructed throughout the late 18th century. Private British coal companies excavated over 2,000 miles of interconnected channels to transport fuel from inland mines to coastal ports. English engineers built hundreds of stone locks, cast iron aqueducts, and deep earthen cuts through the rolling landscape. White buys thick leather boots, a heavy wool coat, and a wide-brimmed felt hat to block the frequent rain. He packs blank paper notebooks, lead pencils, and a rolled brass measuring tape into a canvas rucksack. He begins walking along the dirt towpaths running parallel to the British canals. He travels entirely on foot, maintaining a steady walking pace of 3 miles per hour along the muddy embankments. He walks continuously through the winter of 1817 and the spring of 1818. White stops at the stone locks located on the Bridgewater Canal near Manchester. He pulls the brass measuring tape across the active lock chambers. He writes down the exact dimensions of the wooden lock gates, noting the thickness of the oak planks and the specific placement of the forged iron hinges. He measures the angles of the mortared stone walls and the depth of the water flowing through the central channel. White sketches diagrams of the iron paddle valves used to control the water level inside the enclosed lock chambers. He draws the iron rack and pinion gear mechanisms that allow a single operator to open and close the heavy wooden gates against the water pressure. He presses the lead pencil into the cotton rag paper, creating precise technical blueprints of the British engineering designs. He records the exact cubic volume of water required to fill a standard English lock. White continues his walk across the English countryside, reaching the Pontysilt Aqueduct in Wales, designed by engineer Thomas Telford in 1805. He walks across the cast-iron trough, suspended 126 feet above the River Dee. He records the exact length of the cast-iron spans, measuring 1,000 feet across the valley. He calculates the dimensions of the 18 hollow masonry pillars supporting the massive iron structure. White inspects the towpath running alongside the iron water channel, noting the use of iron railings to protect the draft horses from falling over the edge. He observes the narrow coal barges passing through the aqueduct, measuring the draft of the wooden hulls cutting through the water. He fills page after page of his notebooks with these physical measurements. He documents the construction of the adjacent earthen embankments, recording the specific mixtures of puddled clay and gravel packed together to block the water. White pays close attention to the mortar used between the heavy stone blocks of the British locks and retaining walls. He uses a steel pocket knife to scrape samples of the hardened Parker's cement from the masonry joints. He rubs the brown material between his fingers, noting the gritty texture and extreme physical hardness. He approaches local British stonemasons at active construction sites and asks about the manufacturing process. The masons describe the specific septaria nodules burned in the circular brick kilns to produce the hydraulic powder. White writes down the physical and chemical properties of this clay-bearing limestone. He observes how the cement cures into a solid mass while completely submerged under the cold canal water. He documents the exact ratio of slaked lime powder to river sand used in the British mortar mixtures. During his walk, White visits the workshops of professional instrument makers located in London. He spends his remaining cash to purchase precision surveying tools manufactured exclusively in Europe. He buys a brass Y-level featuring a powerful magnifying telescope and a highly sensitive spirit tube for measuring elevation. He purchases accurate drafting compasses, steel straightedges, and specialized mathematical scales used for creating topographic maps. He packs these heavy brass and steel instruments into wooden crates padded with raw sheep's wool to protect the metal components during transport. In the spring of 1818, White concludes his 2,000-mile walking tour of the British infrastructure. He boards a merchant ship in Liverpool and sails back across the Atlantic Ocean. He arrives at the wooden docks in New York City, carrying his filled paper notebooks and the heavy wooden crates of instruments. White travels up the Hudson River to Albany on a steamboat and presents his notebooks to the canal commissioners. He unrolls his detailed pencil sketches on a wooden table, showing Benjamin Wright the precise dimensions of the British lock gates and the iron paddle valves. The commissioners immediately adopt White's technical drawings for the construction of the New York stone locks. The imported brass Y level provides the extreme optical accuracy required to measure the continuous drop in elevation across the 363-mile route. White repacks his tools and travels westward to the active excavation sites in the Mohawk Valley. He walks along the freshly dug dirt trench, searching the ground for local geological formations capable of matching the chemical properties of the British hydraulic cement he observed overseas. In the summer of 1818, Canvas White inspects the excavated dirt trench in Madison County, New York. He observes the exposed rock layers cut by the workers swinging iron picks into the dense clay. Andrew Bartow, a procurement agent employed by the Canal Commission, arrives at the work site on horseback. Bartow carries a rough piece of dark, porous limestone found near the town of Chittenango. White examines the grey rock in his hands, tracing the visible mineral veins. He records its physical resemblance to the clay-bearing septaria nodules he studied along the English coastlines. White strikes the rock with a steel hammer, chipping off a 1-pound fragment. He places the heavy rock fragment into his canvas bag to conduct a physical test of its chemical properties. White and Bartow carry the limestone sample to the kitchen of a local tavern. White places the rock directly into the glowing wood coals of the brick hearth. He piles dry oak logs over the stone to increase the heat. The fire burns overnight, exposing the limestone to temperatures reaching 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The intense heat initiates a chemical process called calcination, driving carbon dioxide gas completely out of the rock. The next morning, White pulls the burnt, highly porous rock from the white ashes using long iron tongs. The stone exhibits a significant loss of its original physical weight. White places the warm stone onto a flat iron anvil. He strikes the rock with a heavy steel hammer, shattering the calcined material into small fragments. He grinds the small pieces into a fine brown powder, creating a pile of dry dust on the iron surface. White scoops the brown powder into a wooden bowl. He pours a small volume of cold water from a tin cup over the dry dust. He mixes the water and powder, using a wooden spoon to create a thick, gritty paste. He uses his bare fingers to roll the paste into a dense, round ball. White fills a wooden bucket with cold water drawn from a nearby stone well. He drops the ball of paste directly into the water. The heavy ball sinks to the wooden bottom of the bucket, resting completely submerged. White leaves the bucket sitting undisturbed on the wooden floorboards for 24 hours to allow the chemical reaction to proceed. White reaches his hand into the cold water the following day. He touches the submerged ball of paste. The water mixed with the natural silica, alumina, and calcium in the burnt rock to produce a rigid crystalline structure. The paste forms a solid, rock-hard mass under the water. White pulls the hardened ball out of the bucket. He strikes it heavily against the sharp edge of the iron anvil. The hardened cement resists the physical impact, remaining completely intact. The Chittenango limestone contains a natural geological composition of clay and lime. This specific mineral ratio produces a hydraulic cement matching the exact physical strength of the expensive Parker's cement manufactured in Great Britain. The Canal Commissioners observe White's physical demonstration of the hardened cement ball. They immediately hire laborers to open wide surface quarries into the limestone deposits spanning Madison and Herkimer counties. Men strike long steel drill bits with iron sledgehammers, boring deep holes into the solid bedrock. They pour coarse black powder into the holes, insert cotton fuses, and ignite them to blast the rock apart. Workers construct massive circular stone kilns near the quarry sites, measuring 15 feet across. Laborers load the kilns by stacking alternating layers of chopped hardwood and raw limestone blocks. They ignite the wood, burning the rock continuously for 3 days and 3 nights to complete the calcination process on a massive scale. Men wearing heavy leather gloves shovel the burnt stones out of the cooling kilns. Workers load the burnt stones into wooden carts, pulled by teams of oxen. They transport the stones to nearby water-powered grist mills. The running water of the local creeks turns large wooden water wheels. The wooden wheels turn iron gears, rotating the heavy granite millstones. The millstones grind the burnt rock into hundreds of pounds of fine hydraulic cement powder every hour. Workers pack the brown dust into tight wooden barrels to keep the powder completely dry during transport. Ox-drawn wagons haul the heavy barrels directly to the active construction sites along the canal route. The local production bypasses the overseas shipment of expensive cement across the Atlantic Ocean. Stonemasons along the canal route open the wooden barrels. They shovel the brown powder into wooden mixing troughs. They mix the powder with coarse river sand and fresh water using flat iron hose. The masons trowel the thick paste onto the heavy grey limestone blocks used to build the 83 canal locks. They construct 18 massive stone aqueducts to carry the canal water over intersecting rivers, sealing every joint with the new mortar. A single lock chamber holds up to 100,000 gallons of standing water. The water exerts thousands of pounds of outward hydrostatic pressure against the mortared stone walls. The local cement cures into a permanent, waterproof seal between the heavy blocks, holding the stones in place. The flowing canal water washes over the joints, leaving the mortar completely intact. The state of New York utilizes over 500,000 bushels of Canvas White's waterproof cement to complete the masonry structures. Canvas White files detailed paperwork documenting his discovery with the federal government in Washington, D.C. The United States Patent Office grants him a formal patent for his waterproof cement formulation in the year 1820. The federal patent legally entitles White to receive financial royalty payments for every bushel manufactured and used by the construction crews. The private contractors manufacturing the cement withhold the royalty payments. They sell hundreds of thousands of bushels directly to the state, bypassing the federal patent completely. White files formal lawsuits in the New York state courts to demand his designated share of the profits. The state legislature dismisses his legal claims, denying compensation to the engineer for the specific chemical invention holding their stone locks together. The availability of the cheap, waterproof cement accelerates the masonry construction across the flat terrain. Stonemasons finish the mortared joints on the first series of locks located along the middle section. The 90-mile stretch of dirt channel between the towns of Rome and Utica fills with water diverted from local creeks. The heavy oak lock gates hold the water back, relying entirely on the hardened cement joints to maintain the hydrostatic pressure. The canal commissioners prepare a wooden passenger boat to travel onto the newly flooded section, creating a physical demonstration of the working waterway for the taxpayers and politicians in Albany. On October 22, 1819, workers turn iron cranks to open wooden sluice gates on the Mohawk River. Fresh river water flows into the newly excavated dirt channel near Rome, New York. The water fills the 40-foot-wide trench to a precise depth of 4 feet. A wooden passenger boat rests on the surface of the water in Utica, located 15 miles to the east. Shipbuilders constructed the hull of the vessel from white oak planks measuring 2 inches thick, sealing the seams with hot pine pitch. Painters coated the exterior wood with white lead paint. Black painted letters on the bow spell the name Chief Engineer. The canal commissioners named the vessel to honor Benjamin Wright, the chief surveyor who plotted the route through the middle section. Governor DeWitt Clinton, Benjamin Wright, and a group of state officials step across a wooden gangplank onto the flat wooden deck of the vessel. The chief engineer measures 61 feet in length and features a flat bottom. The flat hull design displaces water evenly, allowing the heavy boat to float in just 24 inches of water. A worker stands on the 10-foot-wide dirt towpath beside the channel. He attaches a 60-foot woven hemp rope to an iron ring secured to the bow of the boat. He harnesses the opposite end of the rope to a single gray horse. The worker clicks his tongue, and the horse walks forward along the packed dirt path. The hemp rope pulls tight, lifting dripping wet from the water. The 61-foot-long wooden boat glides forward over the standing water. The single horse pulls the heavy vessel, carrying 70 passengers, at a steady speed of 4 miles per hour. The hull cuts through the water, pushing small ripples against the slanted dirt banks. The boat travels the 15 miles between Utica and Rome. Thousands of local residents stand on the freshly dug earthen banks to watch the vessel pass. Men load small iron cannons with black powder and ignite the fuses with smoldering ropes. The cannons fire, sending loud concussions across the flat farmland. The scent of sulfur from the black powder drifts over the water. The chief engineer travels the entire 15-mile route without stopping, passing through the cleared forest corridors. The passengers sitting on the wooden benches observe the straight lines of the excavated channel, verifying the physical alignment of the surveyor's stakes. This physical demonstration serves a specific political function for the Canal Commission. Governor Clinton organized the October voyage to secure continuous financial appropriations from the New York State Legislature. Politicians sitting in the brick Capitol building in Albany control the state treasury. They distribute the estimated $7 million required for the total construction in separate annual installments. Opposing assemblymen previously read printed broadsheets questioning the physical stability of the earthen banks, using the term Clinton's folly to describe the project. They cited the high daily wages paid to the digging crews and questioned the water retention of the sandy soil. The completed 15-mile section provides physical evidence that a constructed dirt channel holds water and supports heavy wooden vessels. The successful operation of the chief engineer confirms the mathematical calculations drafted by the self-taught surveyors. It validates the revenue collection mechanisms established to fund the state bonds. The state legislature authorized a dedicated canal fund supported by specific regional taxes. Tax collectors gather a 12.5-cent duty on every bushel of salt manufactured at the Onondaga Salt Springs. They collect a $1 tax on every passenger traveling on commercial steamboats navigating the Hudson River. State officials also take a percentage of all goods sold at public auction in New York City. The smooth voyage from Utica to Rome convinces the state assemblymen to maintain these taxes and authorize the sale of the next series of paper bonds to wealthy investors in New York and London. The opening of the middle section instantly alters the local freight mechanics. Farmers living in Oneida County immediately build flat-bottomed wooden scows. They load these heavy wooden scows with split cordwood, rough-sawn lumber, sacks of milled wheat, and barrels of salted pork. A farmer attaches a tow line to his own plow horse and walks down the dirt towpath. The horse pulls up to 30 tons of cargo floating on the water, exerting the same physical effort previously required to pull 1 ton in a wagon over the rutted dirt roads. The cost of moving a ton of freight between Rome and Utica drops from $2 to 20 cents. State toll collectors sit in small wooden booths constructed beside the new channel. They measure the draft of the passing boats to calculate the cargo weight. They collect copper coins from the boat operators based on the tonnage and the distance traveled. The state treasury begins recovering the initial construction costs immediately. The continuous traffic of local farmers creates a steady flow of revenue. The toll money enters the state coffers, funding the purchase of more iron shovels, blasting powder, and surveying tools. The physical proof of the working channel and the immediate toll revenue guarantee the continuation of the project. The Canal Commission prints new contracts for the remaining sections, extending east toward Albany and west toward Buffalo. The digging crews move beyond the loose loam of the middle section into difficult geological zones. The flat terrain of the Mohawk Valley ends. The land elevation rises abruptly to the west toward Lake Erie and drops sharply to the east toward the Hudson River. The water route must climb over solid rock formations. The engineers consult Canvas White's imported notebooks. They calculate the precise water pressure and order stonemasons to build a continuous series of mortared limestone chambers to lift the heavy wooden boats up the sides of the hills. The Hudson River flows south to New York City, maintaining an elevation close to sea level at the town of Albany. Lake Erie sits at an elevation of 565 feet above sea level at the western terminus of the route. The 363-mile dirt trench must bridge this vertical gap. Standing water follows the physical pull of gravity, seeking the lowest point. A single, continuous slanted trench drains the water completely into the Hudson River, leaving the upper channel dry. The engineers separate the long waterway into flat sections of standing water, positioned at different elevations. They connect these flat sections using 83 stone locks to lift the boats up the changes in elevation. A canal lock consists of a rectangular chamber built from heavy gray limestone blocks. Stonemasons cut the blocks using iron chisels and seal the joints using Canvas White's waterproof hydraulic cement. Each lock chamber measures exactly 90 feet long and 15 feet wide. The stone walls stand 15 feet high, anchored deep into the soil to resist the outward hydrostatic pressure of up to 100,000 gallons of water. Heavy double doors enclose both ends of the rectangular chamber. Carpenters construct these doors from thick white oak planks bolted together with forged iron hardware. Iron hinges attach the heavy oak doors directly to the mortared stone walls. The oak doors point slightly inward toward the higher water elevation, forming a geometric angle when closed. The physical weight of the standing water presses against this angle, forcing the heavy wooden edges tightly together to create a waterproof seal. Each wooden door features a small rectangular opening near the bottom edge. Iron paddle valves cover these small openings. A vertical iron rod connects each paddle valve to a rack and pinion gear mechanism mounted on the top of the oak door. A lock tender controls the iron paddle valves using a removable iron crank. The system operates entirely on the principles of fluid dynamics and gravity, utilizing designs drafted by Italian engineers during the 15th century. A horse walking on the dirt towpath pulls a flat-bottomed wooden cargo boat toward a lock from the lower elevation section. The water level inside the stone lock chamber matches the water level of the lower canal section. The lower oak doors stand open. The horse pulls the tow line, gliding the boat directly into the 90-foot-long stone chamber. The boat operator ties a hemp rope to an iron mooring ring, bolted to the stone wall, to secure the vessel. The lock tender walks to the lower oak doors. He presses his shoulder against a massive square oak timber, called a balance beam, attached to the top of the door. He pushes the balance beam in a wide arc over the dirt path, swinging the lower door shut behind the boat. The boat floats in the enclosed chamber, surrounded by 15-foot-high stone walls. The lock tender walks along the top edge of the stone wall to the upper oak doors, holding back the water from the higher canal section. He inserts his iron crank into the gear mechanism mounted on the upper doors. He turns the crank in a circular motion. The iron gears grind together, lifting the iron paddle valves located at the bottom of the upper doors. The water from the higher elevation rushes through the small openings into the enclosed chamber. The cold water hits the stone floor, churning and foaming as it rapidly fills the space. The lock tender leaves the valves completely open. Gravity forces the water from the higher section down into the lock chamber until the two water surfaces reach equal height. The water level inside the stone chamber rises steadily, lifting the heavy wooden cargo boat upward. The boat rises 10 feet in a span of 6 minutes. The water pressure equalizes on both sides of the upper oak doors. The lock tender pushes the upper balance beam, easily swinging the heavy oak doors open against the equalized water pressure. The horse on the towpath leans into its leather harness, pulling the boat out of the chamber and onto the higher elevation of the canal. The physical process reverses for a boat traveling downhill from the higher elevation. The boat enters the full lock chamber. The lock tender closes the upper doors. He walks to the lower doors and turns the iron cranks to open the lower paddle valves. The water drains out of the chamber into the lower canal section, following the pull of gravity. The water level drops, lowering the wooden boat to the bottom of the chamber. The lock tender pushes the lower balance beams, opening the doors, and the horse pulls the boat out onto the lower elevation. A single operator coordinates this continuous transfer of water and cargo using human leverage and the physical pull of gravity. The geographic terrain dictates the specific placement of the 83 locks. The land rises gradually across the middle and western sections of the state. The most severe drop in elevation occurs near the eastern edge of the route, close to the Hudson River. The Mohawk River flows over a hard shale rock formation, plunging 70 feet straight down at the Cohoes Falls. The adjacent land drops approximately 250 feet in a span of just 15 miles. Surveyor Charles Brodhead maps this steep eastern escarpment, driving his wooden stakes into the rocky soil at close intervals. The Canal Commission concentrates construction crews at this specific 15-mile section. Stonemasons build 27 separate stone locks between the towns of Schenectady and Albany to navigate the steep drop. The dense cluster of locks creates a constant, heavy demand for water from the Mohawk River. The masons construct stone feeder dams across the river to divert millions of gallons of water directly into the canal channel. The lock tenders at the Cohoes cluster work continuous 12-hour shifts. They turn the iron cranks and push the heavy oak balance beams from sunrise to sunset. The sound of rushing water, grinding iron gears, and the clopping of horse hooves on the dirt towpath echoes continuously across the 15-mile incline. The 83 stone locks successfully lift the water and the boats over the changes in land elevation. The route continues westward across the state. The canal channel runs horizontally from east to west. Natural rivers flow vertically from north to south across the New York landscape, crossing directly over the planned path of the canal. The engineers face the physical problem of moving the canal water and the towpath directly over these rushing natural rivers. They require massive stone structures to carry the entire artificial waterway straight through the air. The Erie Canal follows a horizontal line from east to west across the state of New York. The natural river systems in this geographic region flow vertically from north to south, draining from the Adirondack Mountains down into Lake Ontario or the Atlantic Ocean. The intersecting water systems create a physical barrier for the canal engineers. The builders physically separate the standing water of the canal from the fast-moving currents of the natural rivers. To cross these intersecting waterways, stonemasons construct a total of 18 stone aqueducts along the 363-mile route. An aqueduct functions as a water-filled bridge, carrying the wooden canal boats and the dirt towpath straight through the air over the natural river below. The largest of these 18 stone structures crosses the Genesee River near the growing town of Rochester. The Genesee River cuts a deep gorge through solid rock, measuring over 800 feet wide at the designated crossing point. In the spring of 1821, laborers begin constructing the Genesee River Aqueduct. Workers wade directly into the cold, waist-deep water of the rushing river. They build watertight, temporary enclosures known as cofferdams. Men drive sharpened pine logs vertically into the riverbed, packing the spaces between the logs with heavy clay. They operate hand-cranked cast-iron pumps to remove the river water from inside the wooden enclosures. The pumping exposes the bare bedrock at the bottom of the river, leaving wet stones covered in green algae. Stonemasons descend into the dry cofferdams to lay the foundation stones. They utilize Canvas White's waterproof hydraulic cement to bind the heavy blocks together. Workers on the riverbank mix the brown cement powder with coarse river sand and fresh water inside wooden troughs using flat iron hose. The mixing creates a thick, gritty paste. They load this heavy paste into wooden buckets. They lower the wooden buckets down to the masons inside the cofferdams using thick hemp ropes. The masons spread the cement over the bare bedrock using flat iron trowels. They use ropes and wooden pulleys to lower massive blocks of red Medina sandstone into place on top of the wet cement. The red sandstone provides physical durability against the rushing river currents. The hydraulic cement cures into a solid, waterproof mass in the damp conditions, anchoring the stone foundation securely to the riverbed. The workers construct 11 separate supporting pillars across the width of the Genesee River, spacing them evenly to leave wide channels for the natural river current to flow through. Carpenters build semicircular wooden frames, known as centering, in the spaces between each of the 11 stone pillars. The wooden centering provides a temporary physical mold for the stone arches. The stonemasons use iron block and tackle systems mounted on tall wooden derricks to lift the red sandstone blocks up into the air. They lay the heavy stones over the curved wooden frames, applying thick layers of the hydraulic cement between every joint. They place a wedge-shaped stone called a keystone at the exact top center of each arch. The keystone locks the entire curve into a stable physical structure. The workers use heavy wooden mallets to knock the temporary wooden centering out from beneath the stones, pulling the wooden frames away. The 11 stone arches immediately settle into place. The stones support their own weight through physical compression, transferring the heavy downward load directly into the supporting stone pillars. The resulting stone bridge spans exactly 802 feet across the river valley. The top surface of this stone bridge forms a flat, continuous platform. Carpenters build a wooden trough on top of this platform to hold the canal water. They bolt thick white oak planks to the stone floor and build vertical wooden walls. Workers line the inside of this wooden trough with a thick layer of puddled clay. They create the puddled clay by mixing local soil with water, stomping on the mixture with their bare feet until it forms a dense, waterproof barrier. The clay seals the gaps between the wooden planks, stopping the canal water from leaking down into the arches. The builders construct a flat wooden towpath along the outer edge of the stone bridge, running parallel to the water trough. Blacksmiths forge an iron railing and bolt it to the outside edge of the towpath. This iron railing prevents the draft horses from stepping over the edge and falling 50 feet into the river below. The Canal Commission officially completes the Genesee River Aqueduct in 1823. Workers open a wooden sluice gate, and water flows into the clay-lined trough, filling it to a precise depth of 4 feet. A horse walks onto the wooden towpath, pulling a loaded wooden cargo boat through the suspended water channel. The iron horseshoes click against the oak planks. The boat travels smoothly over the 802-foot structure. The natural current of the Genesee River rushes past the stone pillars far below the suspended canal. The construction of the 18 aqueducts requires immense volumes of stone, timber, and hydraulic cement. Men quarry limestone and sandstone from surrounding counties and transport the heavy materials to the river crossings on wagons pulled by teams of oxen. Masons trowel the hydraulic cement into thousands of joints at crossings over the Schoharie Creek, the Seneca River, and Oriskany Creek, sealing the blocks against the continuous pressure of the suspended water. The aqueducts successfully connect the isolated sections of the canal together, maintaining a consistent water elevation over the deep river valleys. The canal channel moves steadily westward from Rochester, advancing through the dirt and forest toward Lake Erie. The engineers face a completely different geological obstacle near a location called Bushnell's Basin. The canal route reaches the edge of the Irondequoit Creek Valley. This specific valley features a wide, deep depression in the land carved by ancient glacial activity. The depression stretches 1,320 feet across. The bottom of the valley sits 76 feet below the required elevation level of the canal water. The distance across the Irondequoit Valley is too wide, and the drop is too deep to cross using a mortared stone aqueduct. The engineers issue paper contracts directing the workers to fill the entire valley with loose earth to carry the channel straight across the wide gap. The land surveyors working west of Rochester arrive at the eastern edge of the Irondequoit Creek Valley, near the settlement of Bushnell's Basin. The physical landscape drops abruptly into a deep depression. The valley floor rests 76 feet below the required elevation level of the canal channel. The distance from the eastern rim to the western rim measures 1,320 feet. The engineers calculate the volume of earth required to bridge this specific depression. They issue paper contracts directing local laborers to build a solid earthen ridge connecting the two sides. The Canal Commission labels this proposed structure the Great Embankment on their topographic maps. In the spring of 1821, farmers living in Monroe County signed the state excavation contracts. They traveled to the edge of the valley, bringing their own draft animals and agricultural tools. The workers begin digging into the high ground on both sides of the Irondequoit Valley. A man drives an iron pickaxe into the hillside to loosen the topsoil and the underlying gravel. Another worker scoops the loose dirt using a flat iron shovel attached to a 30-inch ashwood handle. He throws the heavy soil into a wooden wheelbarrow. He grips the two wooden handles, lifts the single iron wheel, and pushes the load to the edge of the slope. He tips the wheelbarrow forward, dumping the dirt directly onto the valley floor. The construction of the embankment requires moving massive volumes of earth through continuous manual labor. The workers establish a wide base on the valley floor to support the final 76-foot height. The bottom layer of the dirt ridge measures over 250 feet wide. Teams of oxen wearing carved wooden yokes walk along the valley floor. The oxen drag heavy wooden rollers, measuring 3 feet in diameter, over the freshly dumped dirt. The physical weight of the wooden rollers compacts the loose soil, pressing the air out of the dirt to create a stable foundation. The summer air temperature reaches 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The men drink water from wooden buckets dipped into the nearby creek to sustain their physical exertion. The laborers utilize horse-drawn slip scrapers to move larger quantities of soil down the hillsides. A worker stands behind the wooden scraper, gripping the 2 handles as a horse pulls the iron cutting edge through the loose dirt. The scraper fills with heavy gravel and sand. The horse drags the filled scraper out onto the expanding earthen ridge. The operator lifts the handles, turning the dirt out onto the compacted base. Hundreds of local residents participate in the earth-moving process. Boys walk beside the horses, guiding the animals with leather reins. Men swing iron shovels for 12 hours a day. The ridge rises foot by foot, requiring exponentially more dirt as the structure grows wider and taller. The piled dirt covers the natural vegetation of the valley floor completely. The Irondequoit Creek flows continuously through the bottom of the valley. The engineers direct the water through the base of the artificial dirt ridge to maintain the natural drainage. Stonemasons construct a massive semicircular stone culvert across the creek bed before the farmers dump the dirt. The masons cut blocks of local limestone and bind them together using Canvas White's waterproof hydraulic cement. The finished stone arch measures 245 feet long and 26 feet wide. The workers dump the wheelbarrows of dirt directly over the top of the stone arch. The creek water flows through the dark stone tunnel, moving under the heavy weight of the compacted earth and the wooden carts rolling above. By the autumn of 1822, the earthen ridge reaches the required height of 76 feet. The top surface forms a flat plateau measuring exactly 40 feet wide. The workers use iron shovels to carve a trench into the top of this artificial hill. They excavate a channel measuring 4 feet deep and 28 feet wide at the bottom. Water seeps rapidly through the loose dirt and gravel of the embankment. The engineers direct the workers to line the entire trough with a thick layer of dense blue clay. The workers spread the wet clay over the dirt floor and the slanted banks. They drive herds of sheep and cattle back and forth over the wet clay. The sharp hooves of the animals knead the clay into a solid, waterproof membrane. The engineers call this specific physical process puddling. The puddled clay dries into a hard surface, sealing the dirt ridge completely. The workers open wooden sluice gates located to the east. Water from the canal flows into the newly dug trench on top of the great embankment. The water fills the channel to the precise depth of 4 feet. The dense clay lining holds the water securely, preventing the moisture from soaking down into the 76 feet of loose earth below. A horse walks onto the 10-foot-wide dirt towpath built along the edge of the ridge. The horse pulls a flat-bottomed wooden cargo boat across the elevated water channel. The boat operator stands on the deck, looking down at the treetops of the Irondequoit Valley, growing 76 feet below the hull of his vessel. The wooden boat continues moving westward along the canal, passing through the town of Bushnell's Basin and arriving at the village of Pittsford. The successful crossing of the Irondequoit Valley allows the digging crews to advance across the flat plains of western New York. The workers dig the 40-foot channel through the topsoil for another 60 miles. The dirt trench leads the workers directly to the base of a vertical face of solid rock. This geological formation, known as the Niagara Escarpment, consists of hard dolomitic limestone blocking the entire path. The stone face rises 80 feet straight up into the air. The engineers must find a mechanical method to lift the wooden boats up this sheer rock formation. The land surveyors working west of the Irondequoit Valley drive their wooden stakes through the flat plains of western New York. In the summer of 1822, the survey teams reach a massive geological formation known as the Niagara Escarpment. This continuous ridge of sedimentary rock stretches across the North American continent, forming the physical ledge that creates Niagara Falls 30 miles to the west. The escarpment stands directly in the path of the canal channel in a heavily forested area soon to be named Lockport. The surveyors set up their brass Y-levels on wooden tripods at the base of the cliff. They sight through the glass lenses and read the elevation markings on the wooden rods held by assistants standing at the top of the ridge. The men record an 80-foot vertical rise from the lower plain to the upper plateau. The exposed rock face consists of dolomitic limestone. This specific type of sedimentary rock contains high concentrations of calcium magnesium carbonate. The magnesium content makes the stone significantly harder and denser than the gray limestone found in the Mohawk Valley. A worker strikes the exposed rock face with an iron pickaxe. The sharp iron point glances off the stone, leaving only a shallow white scratch on the gray surface. The physical impact sends a sharp vibration up the wooden handle directly into the worker's wrists and forearms. The canal channel must cross over this solid rock barrier to reach the elevation of Lake Erie. The water level of the lower canal section sits exactly 60 feet below the required water level of the upper canal section. The engineers must lift the heavy wooden cargo boats, a total of 60 feet, straight up the side of the cliff. The Canal Commission relies on mortared stone locks to lift vessels over changes in land elevation. The standard canal locks built in the eastern sections lift wooden boats a maximum of 15 feet. A single lock measuring 90 feet long and 15 feet wide holds up to 100,000 gallons of water to achieve a 15-foot lift. A lock designed to lift a boat 60 feet requires a stone chamber holding 4 times that volume of water. The hydrostatic pressure generated by a 60-foot column of standing water exerts thousands of pounds of outward force against the lower sections of the stone walls. The engineers calculate that standard stone walls bound with hydraulic cement crack and collapse under this specific volume of water pressure. The physical limitations of the existing lock designs force the Canal Commission to seek a completely new engineering solution to bridge the elevation gap. The Canal Commissioners organize a formal design competition to solve the 60-foot elevation change. They print paper notices soliciting mechanical and architectural designs from engineers and surveyors across the state. The commissioners sit at a wooden table inside their office in Albany, reviewing the submitted proposals. They unroll large sheets of cotton paper covered in black iron gall ink drawings and lead pencil calculations. A group of men proposes building mechanical inclined planes, utilizing heavy iron chains and steam engines to drag the wooden boats up the dry rock face. Other engineers submit plans for deep, winding trenches cut miles out of the way to gradually reduce the steep angle of the climb. The commissioners evaluate the physical feasibility and the projected construction costs of each submitted paper design. Nathan Roberts submits a set of detailed mechanical drawings to the Canal Commission. Roberts works as an assistant engineer on the canal, utilizing his background as a mathematics teacher and land surveyor. He sits at a wooden drafting table in his field office, surrounded by brass compasses, steel straightedges, and glass inkwells. Roberts calculates the specific water pressure exerted by different volumes of water against mortared limestone walls. He uses geometry to distribute the 60-foot vertical lift across a wider physical footprint. He draws a series of individual lock chambers on the paper, connecting them directly end to end. He calculates the thickness of the stone walls required to contain the water pressure at each separate 15-foot level. Roberts incorporates a specific design feature to manage the high volume of boat traffic expected at this narrow junction. He draws two parallel sets of locks sitting side by side on the large sheet of paper. One set of chambers lifts boats traveling westward up the escarpment. The adjacent set of chambers lowers boats traveling eastward down the escarpment. The two parallel systems share a single, massive central stone wall. Roberts determines this central dividing wall requires a thickness of exactly 27 feet of solid masonry to withstand the alternating water pressure coming from both sides simultaneously. He specifies the use of Canvas White's hydraulic cement for every joint in the entire stone complex. He includes detailed diagrams showing the precise angle required for every stone block. The canal commissioners read Roberts's mathematical calculations and examine his geometric diagrams. They select his parallel lock design as the winning submission. The board authorizes the immediate physical construction of the massive stone complex. The state prints new excavation contracts and posts them on tavern walls in towns across western New York. Thousands of laborers, stonemasons, and blacksmiths pack their tools and travel to the base of the escarpment. They arrive driving wooden wagons pulled by teams of oxen. The workers unpack heavy iron sledgehammers, steel hand drills, and wooden barrels filled with coarse black blasting powder. They build wooden shanties and pitch canvas tents in the surrounding forest. The men stand at the bottom of the 80-foot cliff of dolomitic limestone. They look up at the solid grey rock face, preparing to cut a stepped series of stone lock chambers directly into the side of the ridge to lift the wooden boats to the upper water level. Workers begin excavating the dolomitic limestone at the Niagara Escarpment in 1823. Men grip steel drill bits measuring 3 feet long and 1 inch thick. A second worker swings a heavy iron sledgehammer, striking the flat top of the steel bit. They rotate the steel bit after every strike to bore a circular hole directly into the solid rock. The men drill continuously for 4 hours to create a hole 2 feet deep. They pour coarse black blasting powder into the hole. They insert a woven cotton fuse coated in saltpeter and pack damp clay over the opening. A worker lights the cotton fuse with a burning wooden match. The black powder explodes, cracking the dense limestone into heavy, jagged fragments. Laborers step forward carrying iron crowbars to pry the broken rocks away from the cliff face. They load the stone fragments into wooden carts pulled by oxen. The workers blast a wide, sloping terrace into the 80-foot cliff. Stonemasons arrive at the excavated terrace to construct Nathan Roberts's parallel lock system. They lay the foundation for a massive central dividing wall. This central wall measures exactly 27 feet thick and extends the entire length of the lock complex. The masons stack rectangular blocks of grey limestone, binding every joint with Canvas White's waterproof hydraulic cement. The workers mix the brown cement powder with river sand and fresh water in wooden troughs. They trowel the thick paste onto the horizontal stone surfaces. The 27-foot thickness of the central wall provides the specific physical mass required to withstand the hydrostatic pressure of water pushing from both sides simultaneously. The masons build the outer walls of the lock chambers 15 feet away from the central wall, creating 2 parallel channels. The masons build the parallel lock chambers in a continuous stepped series. They construct 5 individual lock chambers connected end to end in a straight line up the escarpment. Each individual chamber measures exactly 90 feet in length and 15 feet in width. The stone walls of each chamber rise exactly 12 feet higher than the chamber immediately below it. The 5 connected chambers create a total vertical lift of 60 feet. The masons construct an identical series of 5 chambers on the opposite side of the 27-foot central wall. The total complex consists of 10 separate stone lock chambers. The public and the canal workers call this specific stone structure the Lockport Fives. Carpenters bolt heavy iron hinges into the mortared stone walls. They hang massive wooden doors built from thick white oak planks at the ends of each chamber. The parallel design allows 2 wooden boats to transit the 60-foot elevation change simultaneously. A boat traveling west from the Hudson River enters the lowest chamber of the northern set of locks. The lock tender pushes the square oak balance beam to close the heavy wooden doors behind the vessel. The lock tender walks up the stone stairs to the next chamber and turns an iron crank. The iron rack and pinion gear lifts an iron paddle valve located at the bottom of the upper doors. Water flows down from the second chamber into the first chamber. The water level in the first chamber rises exactly 12 feet, lifting the wooden boat. The lock tender opens the upper doors, and a horse pulls the boat forward into the second chamber. This physical process repeats 5 times to lift the boat the full 60 feet to the top of the escarpment. While the first boat ascends the escarpment in the northern set of locks, a second boat descends the escarpment in the southern set of locks. The descending boat enters the highest chamber on the southern side. The lock tender drains the water out of the chamber, lowering the boat 12 feet. The horse pulls the boat forward into the next lower chamber. The gravity-fed water flowing out of the descending locks empties directly into the lower canal channel. The parallel system allows continuous movement of freight vessels in both directions. The constant movement of boats maximizes the daily freight capacity of the canal. Lock tenders operate the iron cranks and heavy oak doors 24 hours a day. They rely on whale oil lanterns suspended from wooden posts to illuminate the iron gears at night. The burning whale oil emits a thick, greasy smoke into the air. The construction of this massive stone complex creates a dense concentration of human activity in the surrounding forest. In the year 1821, exactly 3 families lived in wooden cabins near the escarpment. The State Canal Commission issues the construction contracts for the lock complex. Thousands of laborers, stonemasons, carpenters, and blacksmiths travel to the work site. They cut down oak and pine trees to build wooden boarding houses, taverns, and workshops along the edge of the canal trench. The workers stack the rough-sawn lumber to create a grid of dirt streets running parallel to the construction site. By the year 1825, the settlement expands into a town named Lockport. The population of the permanent town reaches 3,000 residents. 2,000 transient laborers live in canvas tents and wooden shanties, pitched directly against the rock walls of the escarpment. The Lockport Fives successfully lift the wooden cargo boats 60 feet up to the flat plateau. The upper canal channel requires a continuous flow of water to float the heavy vessels. The Canal Commission plans to draw this water directly from Lake Erie, located 30 miles to the west. The elevation of Lake Erie matches the elevation of the upper lock chambers. A solid ridge of hard Onondaga limestone sits between the top of the Lockport Fives and the waters of Lake Erie. The limestone ridge stretches for 7 continuous miles. The highest point of this rock formation rises 30 feet above the required water level of the canal channel. The laborers must excavate a straight trench directly through this solid limestone ridge to bring the lake water down to the newly constructed stone locks. West of the Lockport Fives, a solid ridge of Onondaga limestone stretches for 7 continuous miles. This specific geological formation blocks the direct path between the top of the stone locks and the water of Lake Erie. The highest point of this rock ridge rises 30 feet above the required elevation line of the canal channel. The Canal Commission issues contracts in the year 1822 to carve a 40-foot wide trench directly through this 7-mile barrier. Engineers designate this section as the Deep Cut. The project requires the removal of approximately 1.5 million cubic yards of solid rock. Around 1,200 men travel to the ridge to begin the excavation. The workforce consists primarily of newly arrived Irish immigrants. These men cross the Atlantic Ocean on timber ships returning from Great Britain, disembarking at coastal ports and walking hundreds of miles to the construction sites to earn a daily wage of 80 cents. The workers clear the thin layer of topsoil covering the limestone using flat iron shovels. The exposed grey rock presents a solid, unbroken surface. The men form two-person teams to bore holes directly into the stone. One worker sits on the rock surface, holding a thick steel drill bit vertically between his leather-gloved hands. A second worker stands above him, swinging a heavy iron sledgehammer weighing 10 pounds. The sledgehammer strikes the flat top of the steel bit. The seated worker rotates the steel bit a quarter turn after every strike. The iron hammer hits the steel bit 40 times a minute. The physical friction heats the steel bit. The men pour cold water from tin cups into the hole to cool the metal and wash out the crushed stone dust. They drill continuously for 4 hours to create a circular hole measuring 3 feet deep and 1 inch wide. A worker carries a wooden keg holding 25 pounds of coarse black blasting powder to the drilled holes. The black powder consists of a chemical mixture of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal. He pours the granular powder directly into the 3-foot hole using a copper funnel. The soft copper metal rubs against the rock without generating friction sparks. He inserts a length of woven cotton rope coated in a flammable nitrate solution. He packs damp clay tightly into the top of the hole to seal the opening around the fuse. The worker strikes a wooden match against a rough stone and lights the end of the cotton rope. He runs away from the hole over the uneven rock surface. The fire burns down the length of the fuse at a rate of 1 inch per minute. The flame reaches the black powder, triggering an immediate chemical reaction producing rapidly expanding gases. The expanding gases fracture the solid limestone, sending heavy shards of grey rock flying into the air. The explosive force shatters the rock into jagged pieces, weighing up to 500 pounds. The black powder detonations produce variable results in the dense Onondaga limestone. The cotton fuses burn at differing speeds due to moisture absorbing into the damp clay. Workers wait behind wooden barricades for explosions to occur. Men walk back to inspect holes containing intact powder. The delayed fuse ignites the black powder, while the men stand directly over the opening. The exploding rock fragments strike the workers, breaking bones and severing limbs. Sharp pieces of limestone tear through heavy wool clothing and human tissue. The physical force of the blasts kills and maims dozens of laborers across the 3-year excavation. The air in the deep cut smells constantly of burning sulfur and pulverized stone dust. The sharp sound of exploding powder echoes across the ridge continuously, from sunrise to sunset. The continuous blasting creates a trench sinking 30 feet deep into the rock ridge. The trench walls stand vertically, displaying distinct horizontal layers of grey sedimentary rock. The workers must lift the heavy rock fragments vertically out of this deep channel. Local mechanics build horse-powered wooden tower cranes along the edge of the expanding cliff. They construct vertical wooden masts measuring 40 feet tall, supported by thick hemp guy ropes anchored to surrounding oak trees. A horizontal wooden boom extends outward over the center of the deep trench. A thick iron chain runs along the length of the wooden boom, dropping straight down into the 30-foot hole. Laborers working at the bottom of the trench load the jagged limestone boulders into heavy wooden buckets bound with iron straps. They attach the wooden bucket to the iron chain using a forged steel hook. A worker standing on the surface level hitches a single draft horse to a wooden sweep attached to the base of the crane. The horse walks in a continuous circle around the tall wooden mast. The turning sweep rotates a wooden drum, winding the iron chain around a central cylinder. The mechanical advantage lifts the loaded wooden bucket 30 feet straight up into the air. The crane operator swings the horizontal boom sideways, moving the suspended bucket away from the edge of the trench. He pulls a hemp rope to release an iron latch on the bottom of the bucket. The heavy limestone boulders fall onto the ground, forming massive piles of discarded rock parallel to the canal cut. The horse-powered cranes operate continuously through the summer heat and the freezing winter months, lifting hundreds of tons of loose rock out of the trench every day. The laborers repeat the cycle of hand drilling, black powder blasting, and mechanical hoisting for 3 continuous years. By the summer of 1825, the workers carve the channel entirely through the 7-mile limestone ridge. The floor of the 30-foot deep trench reaches the exact elevation required to draw water directly from Lake Erie. The physical removal of the Onondaga limestone opens the final barrier on the 363-mile route. The completion of the deep cut relies directly on the physical stamina of the 1,200 men swinging the iron hammers. The canal workforce required to dig the channel across the state grew from a few hundred local farmers in 1817 into an organized army of thousands of men drawn from multiple nations, living in temporary camps along the newly constructed towpath. In the summer of 1818, the Canal Commission employed exactly 3,000 men to dig the middle section of the trench. By the year 1821, the total number of laborers working along the route expanded to 9,000. The initial workforce consisted primarily of local farmers living in the Mohawk Valley. These farmers returned to their own wheat fields during the autumn harvest season, leaving the digging crews empty. To replace the departing farmers, contractors hired newly arrived immigrants disembarking from merchant ships in New York Harbor. Thousands of men traveled from Ireland to the United States seeking wage labor. These Irish immigrants walked up the Hudson River Valley, carrying their personal belongings in canvas sacks. The men stood in lines outside the Canal Commission field offices. They signed their names or marked a cross on paper contracts using black iron gall ink. They accepted a daily wage of 80 cents, paid out in silver and copper coins at the end of each month. German stonemasons also arrived at the construction sites, bringing forged steel chisels and heavy iron hammers to cut the limestone blocks required for the 83 locks. In 1819, the digging crews reached the Montezuma swamps located near the Seneca River. The canal route required a trench cut directly through miles of stagnant water and deep, saturated peat. The workers stood waist-deep in the warm, brown swamp water for 12 hours a day. The workers sank into the peat up to their knees. The wet mud stuck to the flat iron shovel blades, doubling the weight of every scoop. The men used wooden buckets to bail the continuously seeping water out of the shallow trench. The summer air temperatures reached 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The stagnant water served as a breeding ground for millions of mosquitoes. The insects bit the exposed skin of the laborers, transmitting the malaria parasite directly into their bloodstreams. The workers referred to the disease as the ague. Men infected with malaria experienced severe physical symptoms, including violent shivering, high fevers, and heavy sweating. The disease swept through the camps, incapacitating over 1,000 workers during a single month. The contractors halted the excavation in the Montezuma swamps entirely during the late summer. They waited for the November frosts to freeze the standing water and kill the mosquitoes before resuming the digging. The men lived in temporary wooden shanties, constructed from rough-hewn pine boards. The workers built the shanties by nailing the boards to vertical oak posts. Rain leaked through the gaps in the wooden roof, turning the dirt floors into wet mud. They slept on straw mattresses, laid directly on the ground. The contractors provided daily food rations to fuel the intense physical exertion. A standard daily ration included 1 pound of salted pork, thick slices of baked wheat bread, and boiled potatoes. The contractors also distributed daily rations of corn whiskey to the laborers. The contractors designated a specific worker, known as a jigger boss, to carry a wooden bucket filled with whiskey along the work line. The jigger boss dipped a small tin cup into the bucket and handed the liquor to each man at regular intervals. A worker received a minimum of 1 pint of whiskey per day. The men drank the liquor while swinging heavy iron shovels and pushing loaded wooden wheelbarrows. The combination of alcohol, physical exhaustion, and heavy iron tools led to frequent injuries. The steep dirt banks collapsed under the weight of heavy rain, burying men under tons of wet clay. Falling oak and hickory tree trunks crushed arms and legs. Local physicians traveled to the camps to set the broken bones using wooden splints and tight cotton bandages. The concentration of thousands of workers in specific locations created tense physical proximity. In the year 1822, the Canal Commission concentrated over 2,000 Irish labourers at the Niagara Escarpment to excavate the deep cut and build the Lockport Fives. The contractors assigned living quarters based on the workers' geographic origins in Ireland. Northern Irish Protestants built their wooden shanties on one side of the canal trench. Southern Irish Catholics pitched their canvas tents on the opposite side of the cut. On July 12, 1822, a physical altercation erupted between the two groups of men. The labourers picked up their iron pickaxes, wooden shovel handles, and heavy chunks of limestone. Hundreds of men engaged in hand-to-hand combat on the dirt towpath. Men swung the 30-inch ashwood shovel handles at each other. The flying stones struck men in the face, causing deep lacerations and fractured skulls. Blood stained the white limestone dust covering the ground. The fighting resulted in severe head trauma and broken bones across both camps. The local sheriff called upon an armed militia unit to march into Lockport. The militia fired their lead muskets into the air. The loud reports of the guns forced the two groups of men to separate and return to their respective camps. Following the completion of specific canal sections, many of the immigrant laborers remained in upstate New York. The workers used their accumulated silver and copper coins to purchase small plots of land along the newly dug channel. They dismantled their temporary pine shanties and constructed permanent timber frame houses. The Irish and German laborers planted wheat and corn in the cleared soil. They sent paper letters back across the Atlantic Ocean, instructing their family members to travel to the United States. The small construction camps grew into permanent villages. Town squares, brick churches, and wooden general stores appeared at the intersections of the dirt turnpikes and the canal towpath. The Canal Commission recorded the names of the chief engineers and the contracted foremen in their leather-bound ledgers. The thousands of men swinging the iron picks and pushing the wheelbarrows remained unrecorded in the official state documents. Their physical legacy consisted of the millions of cubic yards of excavated earth piled along the canal banks. By the autumn of 1825, the laborers finished carving the final yards of the dirt trench connecting Buffalo to the Hudson River. They cleared the last tree stumps, sealed the final stone joints with canvas white's hydraulic cement, and removed the wooden cofferdams holding back the lake water. The complete 363-mile waterway stood ready for continuous transit. State politicians in Albany and local merchants in Buffalo organized a coordinated physical demonstration to mark the opening of the continuous channel. Governor DeWitt Clinton boarded a newly painted wooden passenger boat in Buffalo, preparing to travel the entire length of the excavated trench and pour the fresh water of Lake Erie directly into the salt water of the Atlantic Ocean. On the morning of October 26, 1825, workers in Buffalo, New York, clear the final physical barrier separating Lake Erie from the excavated dirt trench. Men use iron shovels to remove the temporary earthen dam blocking the channel. The fresh water of Lake Erie flows directly into the 40-foot-wide trench. The water fills the canal to the standard depth of 4 feet. A wooden passenger packet boat named the Seneca Chief floats on the water at the Buffalo terminal. Shipbuilders constructed the hull from white oak planks painted with white lead paint. The vessel measures 70 feet long and 14 feet wide, built specifically to fit inside the 90-foot by 15-foot stone lock chambers. Governor DeWitt Clinton walks across a wooden gangplank and steps onto the flat deck of the vessel. He carries 2 cedar wood buckets, filled to the brim with fresh water drawn directly from Lake Erie. He places the buckets on the wooden deck. 4 draft horses stand on the adjacent dirt towpath, wearing thick leather harnesses. A worker attaches a heavy hemp tow line from the horse harnesses to the iron mooring ring bolted to the bow of the Seneca Chief. The departure of the Seneca Chief triggers a coordinated signaling system stretching across the entire state of New York. The Canal Commission placed cast iron cannons at regular intervals of roughly 10 miles along the 363-mile route and down the Hudson River. An artilleryman stands next to a cannon in Buffalo. He pours black blasting powder into the iron barrel and packs it down with a wooden ramrod. He touches a burning rope to the touch hole. The black powder explodes, sending a loud physical concussion through the air. 10 miles to the east, a second artilleryman hears the sound of the explosion. He immediately ignites the fuse on his own iron cannon. The sound of the second blast travels to a third artilleryman stationed 10 miles further east. The acoustic signal travels eastward from cannon to cannon along the canal towpath. The explosions echo across the flat agricultural fields of the Mohawk Valley and bounce off the limestone walls of the Niagara Escarpment. The signal turns south at Albany and follows the banks of the Hudson River. The final iron cannon fires at the battery in New York City exactly 80 minutes after the first blast in Buffalo. The artillerymen in New York City immediately reload their cannon and fire a return signal. The acoustic relay travels backward up the Hudson River and west across the canal route. The return signal reaches Buffalo 80 minutes later. The physical sound waves complete a round trip of over 1,000 miles in 160 minutes. The signaling system communicates the opening of the continuous waterway across the entire state, relying entirely on black powder and human hearing. The 4 horses pull the Seneca Chief eastward, away from Lake Erie. The boat travels at a steady speed of 4 miles per hour. The driver on the towpath swaps the tired horses for fresh animals at wooden relay stations positioned every 15 miles. The fresh horses maintain the continuous 4-mile-per-hour pace through the day and the night. The vessel passes through the 7-mile deep cut carved into the solid Onondaga limestone ridge. The hull glides past the 30-foot vertical rock walls, displaying the layered grey sedimentary stone. The boat arrives at the town of Lockport and enters the Lockport Fives. The lock tenders turn the iron cranks to open the paddle valves. The water drains from the upper chambers, lowering the Seneca Chief exactly 60 feet down the Niagara Escarpment. The boat continues eastward across the Great Embankment in the Irondequoit Valley, floating 76 feet above the creek bed. The horses pull the vessel across the mortared stone arches of the Genesee River Aqueduct. The boat passes the newly built timber frame houses in the towns of Rochester, Syracuse, and Utica. State toll collectors, sitting in small wooden booths, record the passage of the Seneca Chief in their leather-bound ledgers. The workers employed by the Canal Commission stand on the dirt towpaths to watch the vessel pass. The men hold the iron shovels and wooden wheelbarrows used to excavate the millions of cubic yards of earth. The Seneca Chief reaches the steep incline near the Cohoes Falls. The lock tenders operate the 27 continuous stone locks, lowering the boat 250 feet down to the elevation of the Hudson River. The vessel arrives at the town of Albany on November 2nd, 1825. At Albany, a steam-powered paddle wheel boat attaches a thick hemp rope to the bow of the Seneca Chief. The steamboat burns chopped cordwood in an iron boiler to generate pressurized steam. The steam drives a piston connected to 2 large wooden paddle wheels mounted on the sides of the hull. The steam engines consume 1 cord of wood every hour, producing thick black smoke from the tall iron smokestack. The turning paddles push the water, pulling the canal boat south down the deep channel of the Hudson River. The vessels travel for 150 miles past the Catskill Mountains. They arrive in the saltwater harbor of New York City on November 4th, 1825. A fleet of wooden merchant sailing ships, steam-powered ferries, and small fishing boats surrounds the Seneca Chief. The sailors fire small brass cannons and ring brass ship bells to mark the arrival of the canal vessel. The steamboat pulls the Seneca Chief past Manhattan and out into the open water of the Atlantic Ocean off Sandy Hook. Governor DeWitt Clinton lifts one of the cedar wood buckets filled with the fresh water of Lake Erie. He tilts the wooden bucket over the edge of the railing. The fresh lake water pours out of the bucket and falls directly into the green salt water of the Atlantic Ocean. He lifts the second cedar bucket and pours the remaining fresh water into the sea. The physical mixing of the 2 bodies of water completes the 8-year construction project. The 363-mile dirt trench, the 83 mortared stone locks, and the 18 stone aqueducts form a continuous, unbroken path connecting the interior of the North American continent to the eastern seaports. The local farmers and merchants load thousands of wooden cargo scows with wheat, timber, and salt, preparing to travel the new waterway and permanently alter the commercial trade routes of the United States. In the year 1825, a wooden canal boat carries 1 ton of freight from Buffalo to New York City for $10. The travel time spans 5 days of continuous movement over the flat water. 15 years earlier, an ox-drawn wagon hauled the same 1-ton load over muddy corduroy roads for $100, taking 2 full weeks to complete the journey. The physical connection of the water channel alters the economic structure of the transport business. Farmers living in the Western Territories load sacks of raw wheat onto wooden schooners sailing on Lake Erie. The ships navigate the freshwater lake and dock at the wooden piers in Buffalo, New York. Dock workers carry the heavy burlap sacks of wheat down wooden ramps and stack them directly into the hulls of the waiting canal boats. Buffalo expands rapidly around this specific transfer point. Carpenters nail rough-sawn pine boards to oak frames to build new warehouses along the waterfront. Masons lay red clay bricks to construct tall grain elevators beside the canal channel. The population of Buffalo grows from 500 residents to over 8,000 people in a single decade. The canal boats, pulled by horses walking on the dirt towpaths, transport the western wheat eastward. The vessels travel through the limestone trench of the deep cut and descend the Lockport Fives. They cross the compacted dirt of the Great Embankment and arrive in the town of Rochester. The Genesee River flows over a series of natural stone drops in Rochester. Local mechanics construct wooden water wheels at the base of these falls. The rushing river water turns the wooden blades, rotating heavy iron gears connected to large granite millstones inside the adjacent buildings. The canal boats tie up to wooden posts along the Rochester towpath. Workers unload the raw Midwestern wheat and feed the grains between the spinning granite stones. The millstones grind the wheat into fine white flour. Coopers build wooden barrels from oak staves and iron hoops to hold the milled flour. They load the heavy barrels back onto the canal boats for the journey east. The concentration of water-powered mills turns Rochester into a major industrial flour production center. The canal boats continue eastward, reaching the town of Syracuse. Syracuse sits above natural underground brine springs. Laborers pump the salt water into wide, shallow wooden vats, exposed to the sun. The solar heat evaporates the water, leaving coarse white salt crystals on the wooden boards. Workers shovel the crystallized salt into wooden barrels. They load these heavy barrels onto the canal boats, using the cheap water transport to distribute the salt to markets across the eastern seaboard. Further east, the town of Utica utilizes the canal to import bales of raw cotton from southern plantations. Factory owners build brick textile mills along the canal banks. Iron power looms inside the mills, weave the raw cotton into finished cloth. The canal boats transport the heavy bolts of woven fabric to the coastal cities. The state of New York constructs specialized waylocks to calculate the toll fees for this continuous stream of cargo. A waylock consists of a stone chamber filled with water, containing a massive iron cradle connected to a scale mechanism. A loaded canal boat enters the stone chamber. The lock tender drains the water out of the chamber, lowering the wooden hull directly onto the iron cradle. The mechanical scale weighs the entire boat and its cargo. The lock tender subtracts the registered empty weight of the specific boat to determine the exact weight of the freight. He calculates the toll fee based on the distance traveled and the weight of the cargo. He collects silver and copper coins from the boat captain and refills the lock chamber with water to float the boat back onto the canal. The collected copper and silver coins accumulate in the wooden strongboxes of the state treasury. The sheer volume of daily boat traffic generates massive toll revenues. Within 9 years of the official opening, the collected tolls equal the entire $7 million construction cost of the project. The New York state government uses the toll revenue to pay back the original investors who purchased the paper bonds. The canal boats travel down the Hudson River and dock at the wooden piers in Lower Manhattan. European merchant ships dock at the adjacent piers. Longshoremen unload iron tools, textiles, and imported goods from the ocean-faring ships. They load these European goods directly onto the canal boats for the return trip westward into the interior of the continent. The constant physical exchange of domestic raw materials and imported manufactured goods increases the trade volume of New York City. The volume of cargo moving through New York Harbor surpasses the freight handled by the ports in Philadelphia, Baltimore, and New Orleans. The specific men who designed the stone locks and calculated the water pressure leave the Mohawk Valley to work on new construction sites. The canal planners and surveying assistants transition into professional civil engineers. Other state governments and private corporations hire Benjamin Wright to survey routes for new infrastructure projects. Wright travels to Virginia and Pennsylvania, setting up his brass Y level to map the paths for the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal and the Delaware and Hudson Canal. Canvas White travels to New Jersey, applying his knowledge of hydraulic cement to supervise the construction of the Delaware and Raritan Canal. James Geddes maps canal routes for the state of Ohio. Nathan Roberts drafts plans for stone locks on the Pennsylvania Mainline Canal. The geometric formulas and masonry techniques developed in the New York forests spread to construction sites across the United States. The 363-mile dirt trench remains cut through the New York landscape. The water drawn from Lake Erie flows steadily eastward, dropping down through the 83 mortared stone locks to reach the Hudson River. The thick old-growth forests, chopped down by the iron axes and endless screw machines, make way for cultivated agricultural fields and growing towns. Draft horses walk at a steady pace along the packed dirt towpaths, leaning into their leather harnesses to pull the heavy wooden cargo boats. The rutted, muddy wagon trail from 1810 sits abandoned, covered in growing weeds and tall grass. The canal water reflects the sunlight, forming a continuous physical line of standing water connecting the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean.